Your bank account has a kill switch. You just don't know it yet. February 26th, 2022. Russia got disconnected from the global financial system in 48 hours. $800 billion frozen. Just gone. Not bombed. Not stolen. Deleted with keystrokes. No bullets fired. No troops deployed. Just money turned into a weapon. And here's what nobody's telling you. Every single dollar in your account has the same switch. Every transaction you make flows through a system that was designed as a weapon first, currency second. This isn't economics. This is financial warfare, and you're already standing in the combat zone. Let me show you how we got here. Start with the simplest truth about modern power. For most of human history, if you wanted to destroy an enemy, you invaded them. Tanks, bombs, occupation. Expensive, slow, politically costly. Body bags come home, populations get angry, wars end. But in 1950, something changed. The United States discovered you could destroy a country without firing a shot. The weapon was money. The target was China. And it worked so well that every superpower has been perfecting it ever since. Here's what happened. Chinese Communist Revolution, 1949. Mao takes power. The United States doesn't recognize the new government. But recognition is just symbolic. The real move comes in December 1950. President Truman freezes all Chinese assets in the United States. $150 million vanished from Chinese control. Then he goes further. Any country trading with China gets sanctioned too. It's not just bilateral punishment, it's a network weapon. China gets cut off from global trade, not because they can't produce goods, but because they can't process payments. The financial system becomes a wall. Now watch what happens to an economy when you do this. China, 1950 to 1970. GDP growth rate collapses. Famine kills millions. Industrial development stalls. Not because of domestic policy alone, but because sanctioned countries can't import food, machinery, technology, or medicine using normal financial channels. They're forced into barter systems, black markets, and bilateral deals with other pariah states. It's economic siege warfare, and it doesn't require a single soldier. But here's where it gets interesting. The Chinese don't just collapse. They adapt. By 1971, China has built an entirely parallel economic system with the Soviet Union. Rubles, renminbi, direct commodity swaps. No dollars involved. When Nixon visits China in 1972, he's not ending the sanctions because America won. He's ending them because they stopped working. The sanctions created exactly what they were designed to prevent: a rival economic bloc with its own financial infrastructure. The weapon backfired. Let me show you the anatomy of a modern sanction because the sophistication has increased exponentially. It's not just freezing assets anymore. It's financial architecture warfare. Start with SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. Sounds boring, right? It's not. SWIFT is the messaging system that allows banks to talk to each other globally. When you wire money internationally, SWIFT carries the message. 11,000 banks in 200 countries. Every single day, 42 million messages. $5 trillion moving through the system. And it has a choke point, Belgium. That's where the servers are. And Belgium follows US and EU sanctions policy. Here's what that means in practice. Iran, 2012. The United States and European Union decide Iran's nuclear program is a threat. They don't bomb enrichment facilities. They disconnect Iranian banks from SWIFT. Every single Iranian bank. Immediately, Iran can't receive payments for oil exports, can't pay for imports, can't process international transactions. The Iranian economy contracts by 6% in 1 year. Inflation hits 40%. The currency loses half its value. No missiles launched, just financial disconnection. The economic damage exceeds what a bombing campaign could achieve. But watch what Iran does in response. They don't surrender, they innovate. Within 18 months, Iran has built workarounds. Oil sales to China and India settled in local currencies. Gold smuggling networks through Dubai and Turkey. Cryptocurrency adoption for international trade. Barter agreements with Venezuela and Russia. The sanctions hurt, but they don't work. And they create something else entirely. A coalition of sanctioned states learning to operate outside the dollar system. The counter-sanction strategy isn't retaliation, it's building alternative infrastructure. Now let me show you the most sophisticated financial weapon ever deployed. The US dollar as reserve currency. This is the mechanism that makes American sanctions uniquely powerful. 60% of global reserves held in dollars. 88% of international transactions use dollars at some point. Even when Japan trades with Germany, they usually settle in dollars. Why? Because oil is priced in dollars. Because dollar debt markets are the deepest and most liquid. Because the entire post-World War II financial architecture was built around dollar dominance. Every central bank, every major corporation, every country needs dollars to function in the global economy. Here's the weapon hidden inside that system. If you need dollars, you need access to American banks. If you need American banks, you follow American rules. Even if you're not American. Even if you're trading with countries that aren't American. The dollar system gives the United States extraterritorial authority over global finance. It's not just economic power, it's jurisdictional power over other people's money. And the United States uses it aggressively. Let me show you a specific case that reveals how this works. BNP Paribas, 2014. French bank, one of the largest in Europe. They processed $8.9 billion in transactions involving sanctioned countries. Sudan, Iran, Cuba. The transactions didn't involve American parties. They didn't happen on American soil, but they were denominated in dollars. That meant they cleared through correspondent banks in New York. American jurisdiction applied. The U.S. Justice Department fined BNP Paribas $8.9 billion, the largest fine ever imposed on a bank at that time. Every major international bank watched. The message was crystal clear: use dollars, follow American rules, or be destroyed financially. Now watch what happens when you scale this up. Russia, February 2022. Invasion of Ukraine. The West responds with the most comprehensive sanctions in history. Russian central bank assets frozen, $300 billion. Swift disconnection for major Russian banks. Export controls on technology. Import bans on Russian oil and gas phased in. Seizure of oligarch assets globally. And here's the nuclear option. Sanctions on anyone who helps Russia evade sanctions. Secondary sanctions, tertiary sanctions. The entire global financial system pressured to choose. Trade with Russia or trade with the West. You can't do both. The economic impact is immediate. Russian ruble crashes 40% in 2 weeks. Stock market closed for a month. Capital flight. Inflation spikes. Western economists predict Russian economy will contract by 15%. Russia will run out of foreign currency reserves in months. The sanctions will force withdrawal from Ukraine or regime change in Moscow. That was the theory. Here's what actually happened. Russian economy contracts by 2.1% in 2022, recovers to growth in 2023. How? Counter-sanctions. And they're brilliant in a terrifying way. First move, energy leverage. Russia announces payments for natural gas must be made in rubles. European countries dependent on Russian gas have to buy rubles. Demand for rubles surges. Currency stabilizes. Second move, commodity power. Russia is the largest wheat exporter globally, third largest oil exporter, major supplier of fertilizer, palladium, titanium, rare earth elements. They don't ban exports, they just redirect them. China, India, Turkey become intermediaries. Oil flows east instead of west. Prices rise. Russia sells at premium to willing buyers. Third move, parallel payment systems. Russia accelerates integration with China's CIPS system, cross-border interbank payment system. It's China's alternative to SWIFT. Not as big yet, but growing fast. Russia and China settle trade in renminbi and rubles. India uses rupees. The dollar is cut out. Fourth move, gold and cryptocurrency. Russian central bank increases gold reserves. Oligarchs move assets into Bitcoin and Ethereum. Harder to freeze, harder to track, harder to sanction. The counter-sanctions don't just defend Russia, they fragment the global financial system. Two economic blocks emerging. The dollar-euro bloc and the renminbi-ruble bloc, with swing states like India, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia playing both sides. Exactly what happened with China in the 1950s. The weapon creates the threat it's meant to prevent. A multipolar financial order where American sanctions lose effectiveness. Let me show you why this matters for you specifically. The sanctions system only works if dollars remain the only game in town. If alternatives exist, sanctioned countries adapt. And adaptation creates infrastructure that everyone can use. You probably think you'll never be sanctioned. You're not a Russian oligarch or Iranian bank. But the system doesn't work that way. It scales down. Sanctions architecture built for nation-states gets deployed against individuals. Canadian truckers, 2022. Protest convoy in Ottawa. Government invokes Emergencies Act. Banks ordered to freeze accounts of protesters and donors. No trial, no conviction, just financial disconnection. 200 bank accounts frozen. Crowdfunding platforms shut down. Cryptocurrency wallets blacklisted. The same tools used on Russia deployed on citizens. The weapon doesn't discriminate once it's built. Or take this, Nigerian protesters, 2020. NSAR's movement. Government orders banks to freeze accounts of protest organizers. Traditional finance complies immediately. Protesters switch to Bitcoin. Government bans banks from servicing cryptocurrency exchanges. Protesters use peer-to-peer Bitcoin trading. Each move in the sanctions game creates a countermove. The technology evolves toward unfreezable money because freezable money is a weapon. Here's the mechanism that explains everything. Financial sanctions work through three pressure points: access, exchange, and storage. If you can cut someone off from accessing the system, they can't transact. If you control exchange between currencies, you control prices and liquidity. If you can freeze stored wealth, you can destroy capital. All three require centralized infrastructure: banks, SWIFT, correspondent relationships, currency exchanges. Centralization creates the choke point. The choke point is the weapon. Counter-sanctions are about decentralizing those three functions. Alternative access through parallel banking systems. Alternative exchange through bilateral currency deals or cryptocurrency. Alternative storage through physical commodities, gold, or digital assets that can't be frozen. Every innovation in counter-sanctions is an innovation in decentralization. And decentralization makes future sanctions less effective. Let me show you where this goes next because the escalation is predictable. China's watching Russia's sanctions closely. Taiwan is the flashpoint. If China moves on Taiwan, the West will deploy the same sanctions playbook. Freeze Chinese central bank reserves. Cut China from SWIFT. Secondary sanctions on anyone trading with China. The economic nuclear option. But China has been preparing since 2012. Here's what China built. CIPS payment system launched 2015, now processing over $3 trillion annually. Belt and road infrastructure creating trade routes that bypass Western ports. Currency swap agreements with 80 countries eliminating dollar dependency. Digital yuan, fully operational, giving China sovereign control over payment rails. Strategic reserves of oil, rare earths, semiconductors to outlast sanctions. And the biggest move, internationalizing the renminbi, making it a viable reserve currency alternative. The counter-sanctions are pre-deployed. When China gets sanctioned, and it's when not if, they have a financial life support system ready. The sanctions will hurt, they always do, but they won't be fatal. And they'll accelerate the fracture of the global financial system into competing blocks. We're watching the end of dollar hegemony in slow motion. The weapon is being dulled by repeated use. Now here's the part that gets philosophically uncomfortable. Are sanctions better than war? The obvious answer is yes. Financial pressure is less deadly than military invasion. Nobody dies from a frozen bank account, right? But look closer. UN estimates North Korean sanctions contributed to tens of thousands of deaths from malnutrition and lack of medical supplies. Venezuelan sanctions associated with 40,000 excess deaths, according to economic studies. Iranian sanctions degraded healthcare infrastructure during COVID. The sanctions don't kill directly, they kill structurally. And they kill civilians more than elites. Here's the moral paradox. Sanctions are sold as alternatives to war, but they're most effective against countries that can't fight back economically. North Korea, Venezuela, Iran. These countries can't build counter-sanctions infrastructure fast enough. They can't redirect trade. They can't develop alternative currency systems. The populations suffer while elites find workarounds. But against peer competitors like China and Russia, sanctions create exactly what they're designed to prevent: rival power blocks with incentive to cooperate and destroy dollar dominance. The system is most cruel to the weak and least effective against the strong. That's not a bug. That's the physics of economic warfare. Weapons always work better against the defenseless. Let me show you one more example that ties everything together. Afghanistan, August 2021. U.S. withdrawal. Taliban takes control. United States immediately freezes $9 billion in Afghan central bank reserves. The reserves are held in New York. They're Afghanistan's money, but stored in American banks. The freeze is instant. Afghanistan's banking system collapses. Cannot pay government salaries. Cannot import food. Cannot access international aid. Humanitarian crisis deepens. Who gets hurt? Not the Taliban. They don't use the banking system. The civilians who depend on that system for survival. 6 months later, half those reserves are redirected to 9/11 victims' families. It's no longer a freeze, it's confiscation. Sovereign wealth taken and redistributed. The justification is moral. The mechanism is revealing. If the United States can confiscate Afghanistan's reserves, it can confiscate anyone's reserves. Every country watching takes notes. Russia accelerates de-dollarization. China diversifies reserves. Saudi Arabia discusses oil sales in renminbi. The trust required for reserve currency status evaporates. The weapon consumes its own legitimacy. Here's what happens next and why nobody can predict it accurately. We're in a transition period. The old system where U.S. sanctions were almighty is ending. The new system where multiple financial blocs compete isn't fully formed. During transitions, everything is unstable. Countries are hedging, building parallel systems while still participating in dollar networks, testing which alternatives actually work. The next major crisis will determine which architecture wins. If the dollar system successfully sanctions China and forces policy change, dollar dominance extends another generation. Every country learns you can't escape the network. But if China weathers sanctions and proves the alternative systems work, the dollar loses reserve status gradually, then suddenly. We're watching a stress test in real time. The outcome determines whether money remains a unified weapon or fragments into competing arsenals. What does this mean for you practically? Your financial sovereignty depends on which system wins. In a dollar-dominant world, your money is stable but controllable. Sanctions architecture that works on Russia works on your bank account too. In a multipolar world, your money is less stable but harder to control. More currencies to choose from means more volatility but more exit options. You're watching the future of money being decided by sanctions and counter-sanctions. You don't get to opt out. You just get to watch which cage you end up in. Here's the honest uncertainty. Nobody knows if sanctions prevent wars or cause them. Nobody knows if counter-sanctions create stability or chaos. Nobody knows if financial weapons make the world safer or more fragile. We're running a global experiment with 8 billion people as test subjects. The sanctions keep escalating. The counter-sanctions keep innovating. And the system that's supposed to prevent conflict is creating the conditions for something potentially worse. Not conventional war. Financial Cold War that could turn hot if miscalculated. The kill switch on your bank account isn't theoretical. It's already been used. On nations, on companies, on individuals. The only question is where the threshold sits and who decides when to flip it. For now, you're probably safe. You haven't been sanctioned. You're not on a blacklist. Your transactions flow normally. But the infrastructure is built. The precedent is set. And the weapon, once created, will be used. That's not cynicism. That's history. Every military technology ever invented gets deployed eventually. Financial weapons follow the same pattern. So what do you do with this knowledge? The practical answer is diversification. Don't keep all assets in one currency. Don't trust any single financial system completely. Understand that your bank account is permission-based money. Someone can revoke that permission. The philosophical answer is harder. We built a system where money is a weapon because we thought it was more humane than bullets. Maybe it is. Maybe it just kills slower. And maybe the counter-sanctions creating a multipolar financial world are worse than American hegemony. Or maybe they're the only defense against weaponized money. I don't have that answer. Nobody does yet. We're all finding out together. The sanctions will continue. The counter-sanctions will evolve. And your money, whether you realize it or not, is ammunition in a war that never formally started and might never formally end. Welcome to financial warfare. You've been enlisted. You just didn't know it.